You need only claim the events of your life to make yourself yours. When you truly possess all you have been and done, you are fierce with reality. And Parker adds, I now know myself to be a person of weakness and strength, liability and giftedness, darkness and light. I now know that to behold means to reject none of it, but to embrace all of it. This is our wholeness. Nothing is left out of the altar of our hearts. So beautiful. Thank you. So as a reminder, we are in the middle of a 6-week journey through Parker Palmer's book, Let Your Life Speak, Listening for the Voice of Vocation. And the title for chapter 4 is All the Way Down. And it's about Parker's personal journey through clinical depression and the lessons that he gleaned from his depression. So I'd like to take a moment and just ask that together we create a very sacred and safe container for our time together. Because depression is a very tender subject, as is the full gamut of mental health challenge. And it's one that affects everyone. I read a study recently that said currently 1 in 5 adults are dealing with a mental health issue right now. That same study said that over the adult lifespan, 1 in 2 adults will experience some kind of mental health struggle. So I'm asking that we all hold today's conversation with that spacious, loving heart that I know is at the core of Unity Church of the Hills, as we move through our time together with generous understanding and remain porous to the movement of spirit. And I think there are 2 key frameworks that will help us do that Parker weaves indirectly or directly into his chapter that will help us create that container today. The first is that depression is a mystery. The underlying causes of depression are vast, multifaceted, and often intertwined. They range from biochemical to situational, and they affect us in the mental, physical, and spiritual realms. They often must be addressed from all of these phases of our being. And each individual's experience is unique. Parker is very clear that his chapter is not prescriptive. And I want to be very clear that neither is my message, that I'm here to talk a little about my own journey with depression and anxiety in hopes that it resonates and that it brings that topic out of the shadows and into the light, which is the only place where it can really heal and will allow for the movement of spirit as we move along. So Parker says, mystery surrounds every deep experience of the human heart. The deeper we go into the heart's darkness or its light, the closer we get to the ultimate mystery of God. But our culture wants to turn mysteries into puzzles to be explained or problems to be solved, because maintaining the illusion that we can quote unquote straighten things out makes us feel powerful. So it's probably a good time to take a pause and talk about paradoxes. Linda Martella-Whitsitt, who is the director of Silent Unity, says we are 100% divine and 100% human. In Unity, we are taught that we are powerful beyond measure, which is true. And Parker is talking about our need to solve puzzles in order to feel powerful. So, which is it? Yes, and. This is the paradox of the human journey through spiritual evolution, from identifying with our minds, with our masks, to our very essence. We get to dance in those nuances of being the Christ and not yet walking on water. Being one with God and in our forgetting and in our wearing our masks, experiencing separation. Which leads to the second framework for our conversation today, which is the distinction between healing and fixing. No one here is broken. None of us. We are the essence of wholeness itself. And Parker talks about depression as a disconnection from source, from one another, from ourselves. And that can feel like brokenness. I can tell you, it feels like brokenness. But we are whole, even in that feeling of brokenness. We just have to open to the rivers of our being and allow that wholeness to flow. And this is particularly important when you are supporting a friend or a loved one through their depression or anxiety. Just as we love to solve puzzles, we love to fix, because it is painful to watch our loved ones suffer. But Parker talks about the various well-meaning visitors and friends who would offer words of comfort that only made the situation worse for him. And he says, one of the hardest things that we must sometimes do is to be present to another person's pain without trying to fix it. To simply stand respectfully at the edge of that person's mystery. I believe that bearing witness with deep love is the most powerful act that we can offer another human being. We say without words that you are seen and you are whole. You are seen and you are whole. And so I just want to say that if you are someone who could use a friend to stand respectfully at the edge of your mystery, we do have a pastoral care ministry here, and I would invite you to talk to my wife, Joni, after the service, or come and find me. So now Parker talks about a pivotal question that he is asked by his therapist, which kind of underpins our talk, the rest of our talk for today. And the therapist asks him, "You seem to look upon depression as the hand of an enemy trying to crush you. Do you think you could see it instead as the hand of a friend pressing you down to ground on which it is safe to stand?" And Parker goes on to say that he had been living an ungrounded life, living at an altitude that was inherently unsafe. And he talks about 4 means that put him at this high altitude. And these resonated so much with me in my own journey that I want to touch on them briefly, and then I'll share a bit about my journey. And then we'll talk about the title for today's service is The Ground of Our Being. And so we'll touch on how that ground of being can be a soft landing for us when we're caught in struggle. So the 4 means that Parker puts out there that he says put him at an unsafe altitude are, number 1, living largely in his head. I can tell you I resonate with all of them. Number 2, serving an abstraction of God rather than living into the experiences of God. Number 3, allowing his ego to become inflated and as a result, having to mask his fear that he was less than he should have been. I think today we call that imposter syndrome. And finally, what he calls his distorted ethic, or what I call an idealized self, living by images of who we ought to be and what we ought to do. So now I have struggled with several periods of depression throughout my life, And most of these were situational, but each is rooted in placing my sense of identity on what I did. I'm a workaholic, recovering sometimes, and I got value out of what I was able to do and what I did and the labels that went along with that. And I recently heard this quote from an internal medicine doctor named Dr. Neha Sangwan, who has been studying the negative health effects of people-pleasing. And this is what she says. We lose an anchor to ourselves and become a yes to the outside world. We become driftwood in the ocean, going in whatever direction the wind is blowing us. It's overwhelming. We don't feel grounded. We don't feel centered. We're just going in whatever direction the world is going. And the goal in the end is to become a sailboat with a rudder that is influenced by the wind but charts its own course. I love that image of a sailboat with a rudder. So in my sort of 3 distinct periods where my sense of identity attached to what I did in the world suddenly came to an abrupt end, clearly there's a pattern there. This last one really brought me to my knees and kind of forced me to learn some of the lessons. And I'm grateful for it, honestly. It was that friend bringing me to safe ground. And I can see all of Parker's means within this last round, well, within all of them. So the first is I very much live in my head. That's where I'm most comfortable. But as I started having mystical experiences between 2008 and 2015, instead of grounding those experiences into being in the world and being in my body, that abstraction of God took me out into the cosmos. I mean, who doesn't love to hang out in the allness of God, right? It's blissful, but it's also anchorless. And my body was kind of vacant. Going back to Dr. Neha's description, I was driftwood. And then I layered on that this distorted ethic that said that driftwood was a spiritual act. I am serving the moment. I am letting what is needed tell me what I should be doing. Isn't that a spiritual act? But what I didn't realize is I was really just abdicating my agency and avoiding making hard decisions. Dr. Neha says that at the root of people-pleasing is this inability to be with the discomfort in our bodies. And how often do we just react in order to avoid sitting with what we are feeling? I truly thought that I was just being spiritual. So then we come to the fourth one. I may be going out of order, which is the inflated ego. Parker Parmer uses this phrase in chapter 4 that is like a gut punch of brutal honesty. Functional atheism. And it is okay to squirm in your seat just a little bit. Functional atheism is when we think we have to make it happen. Which brings us back to that paradox, right? Wait, I'm 100% divine and 100% human. All of God exists in its fullness in me, just as it does in you and in everyone. We are powerful beyond measure. But that part of us that feels inadequate and separate, the ego, takes that notion and it runs with it. And then it hides its limitations so the world doesn't see it, feeling like an imposter but afraid to admit it. While this is not our true self, it is a part of us that needs to be acknowledged, loved, forgiven, and offered grace. So back to my story. I thought it was all on me. I thought it was on me to do it all. I fell into that functional atheism, which I think is easy to do in this world. We want to be of service. And I just kept pushing myself. I didn't want to let anyone down. And I prided myself on being a high producer. I have most of my life been a really high producer. And it is humbling when that ability to produce at the level that you are used to producing at goes away. But I just kept pushing. And I was living so fully outside of my body that one day my body did the only thing it knew to do to get my attention. It stopped working. Obviously not completely. I'm still here and I'm breathing. Yay, hallelujah. But I did allow myself to burn out, and it has been a slow, hard, difficult, dark, and yet really beautiful journey of uncovering my innate wholeness again. And while it is still unfolding, I know that I will look back on this period as one of the greatest periods of my life because it brought me home to myself, which is Parker's invitation. And it's my invitation to you, that we see darkness when it shows up as a friend that is trying to bring us to safe ground. Now, the term ground of being was coined by theologian and philosopher Paul Tillich, and it is quickly becoming one of my favorite ways to describe God. The ground of being out of which everything arises. Exodus 3:5 tells the story of God appearing to Moses, speaking to him as a burning bush. And God says to Moses, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." Now, I was reminded of this passage in a video by Rob Bell that is called Breathe, and I highly suggest you Google it and watch it. Like Roderick said, not right now, I'm talking. But afterwards, I highly recommend it. It's a beautiful video. And Rob reminds us that Moses has been walking this land for years. It's not as if the land suddenly became holy. It isn't as if the ground suddenly changed. God is reminding Moses of the innate holiness that is all around him and within him. The ground is holy by its very nature, as are we. Rob Bell says your life is but a breath, and yet you were made by the creator of everything. I think we forget that sometimes. We were made by the creator of everything. Dr. Hawkins says that when you walk in the woods, trees are literally bowing at your divinity, to the shared holiness that we share with them. In the book, Parker quotes Florida Scott Maxwell, and he says, "You need only claim the events of your life to make yourself yours. When you truly possess all you have been and done, you are fierce with reality." And Parker adds, "I now know myself to be a person of weakness and strength, liability and giftedness, darkness and light. I now know that to behold means to reject none of it, but to embrace all of it. This is our wholeness. Nothing is left out of the altar of our hearts." So by coming out of our heads, out of our inflated egos and out of our abstractions of God, out of our idealized sense of self that tells us what we should be and that tells us that even though we should be that, we feel unworthy, we get to come home. That's the invitation, to come home to the ground of our being that wants us to land softly and safely in our bodies, in the world, with the people who love us. Because there's always this loving and gentle hand that is guiding us safely to the ground. And we can be that safe ground for each other through our sacred listening, through our generous understanding, and for our deep love. And I thank you for your deep listening today. Namaste.
Hey, you can register online for Reverend Cynthia's workshop, Accountability, the Intersection of Truth and Love. It's going to be offered in person on February 17th and on Zoom February 19th. This workshop can be used for ethics CEUs for Unity ministers or LUTs, and you can see the website for details. So this week, starting tomorrow, there will be roof replacement work in this building. And its estimated completion time is 6 to 8 weeks. And please be patient and mindful of safety flags and cones during the construction. And they'll be working all week, Monday through Friday. And you can join Dr. Dan Stasik this Tuesday evening in room 203 for his Learn to Meditate class, and this one is from the Himalayan tradition. And 100% of the proceeds are donated to UCOH. And now we are blessed and grateful to announce and welcome Anaya as our new events manager. Woo! Give her a hand. You know, she's been doing a great job already at managing events as a volunteer for several months, and now she's been added to the staff, so that's great. Thank you, Anaya, and welcome. Grab a cup of coffee and join Reverend Jean Lean in the Legacy Suite or on Facebook for her message, Pain Pushes Until Vision Pulls, and that's at 8:30 a.m. At 11:30, moving into our part 5 of our series on Parker Palmer's book, Let Your Life Speak, Reverend Cynthia explores authentic leadership, leadership that is about expanding our consciousness and liberating the heart. As co-creators of our experience and members of a spiritual community, each of us has the responsibility to do our own deep inner work and to touch the world in healing and transformative ways. That will be in the sanctuary, or you can listen online. And I know it's early, but they want you to know that our joyous Easter festivities, or our Easter service, will be moved to 10:30 in the morning instead of 11:30. Divine love, through me, blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I have, all that I circulate, and I am grateful.